The alien marketplace was a chaotic, colorful place, filled with strange creatures, bright lights, and the scent of spices unknown to humans. James walked through the narrow paths between stalls, feeling out of place yet fascinated. He had come to this distant planet, Vokris 7, as a trader looking for rare minerals and technology. But what he found was something far more unexpected. At the center of the market stood a large auction platform. Various beings were being sold, some as workers, others as exotic pets. James clenched his fists. He hated seeing this, but he knew interfering in alien laws was dangerous. Humans were still new to the galactic community, and causing trouble could have serious consequences. Just as he was about to leave, a new auction started. A small cage was rolled onto the platform. Inside sat a young alien woman with delicate features, silver blue skin, and large, expressive eyes. Her thin frame suggested she had been mistreated. The auctioneer, a slimy, tentacled merchant, spoke in a guttural language, displaying her as a rare and valuable companion. James's stomach twisted. It was clear what that meant. He glanced at the audience and saw various alien buyers nodding, ready to bid. His mind raced. He couldn't just walk away. 5,000 credits, a deep-voiced alien called out. 6,000, another countered. James took a deep breath. This was insane. He had no plan, no idea what he was doing. But before he could stop himself, the words left his mouth. 10,000 credits. The crowd fell silent. The auctioneer's tentacles twitched with excitement. Sold. To the human. James handed over his credits, and the merchant shoved the cage toward him. As soon as he unlocked it, the alien woman stepped out, staring at him with wide, astonished eyes. She trembled, clearly expecting something bad to happen. "You're free," James said gently. She blinked. "What?" Her voice was soft and melodic, though accented. "I said you're free," he repeated. "You don't have to stay with me. You can go wherever you want." The alien woman didn't move. Then, to his shock, her expression shifted, not to fear or confusion, but joy. You bought me?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. James hesitated. Yeah." To his absolute surprise, she clasped her hands together and beamed at him. "This is wonderful," she exclaimed. James stared. "Wait, what?" Before he could say anything else, she threw her arms around him in an unexpected hug. "Thank you, human. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." James had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. James stood frozen as the alien woman hugged him tightly. He had expected fear, confusion, maybe even anger. Instead, she was happy. This was not how things were supposed to go. She pulled back, looking up at him with wide, shining eyes. "You really bought me?" she asked again, as if making sure. James scratched his head. Yeah. But..." She clasped her hands together and nearly jumped with excitement. "Oh, this is the best day of my life. Thank you, human." James blinked. "What?" She gave him a bright smile. "I thought I would end up with one of them." She gestured toward the crowd, where several aliens were still watching, some looking annoyed, others amused. "But instead, you chose me. This is wonderful." James glanced at the auction platform, then back at her. Something was off. Why was she so happy? "Listen, I didn't buy you to keep you," he said carefully. "I just wanted to get you out of there. You're free now." Her smile didn't fade. Instead, she tilted her head. "Of course I'm free. I belong to you now." James groaned. "That's not... you. Never mind. Look, what's your name?" She straightened proudly. "I am Rilla of the Velari." James nodded. "Okay, Rilla. I'm James." He pointed to himself. "And I don't own you, all right. You can go wherever you want." Rilla blinked at him. Then, to his growing frustration, she grinned. "Yes, I go wherever I want, and I want to stay with you. James exhaled sharply. That's not. He stopped himself. This wasn't going anywhere. He glanced around. The crowd had lost interest, moving on to the next auction. He needed to get out of here before more trouble found him. Come on, he muttered. Let's get out of here. Rilla followed eagerly as James led her through the market. He could feel her excitement, like a child seeing the world for the first time. Every few steps, she gasped at something new. Oh, look at that! She pointed at a floating fruit stand. That smells amazing. James sighed. Do you want something to eat? Rilla's eyes sparkled. Can I? He shook his head, but tossed a few credits to the fruit vendor. The alien behind the stall handed her a glowing blue fruit. She took a bite and let out a delighted hum. This is the best thing I have ever eaten, she said. James couldn't help but smile a little. At least she wasn't upset. As they continued walking, James tried to think. What was he supposed to do with her? He had expected to free her, wish her luck, and move on. But clearly, she had a different idea. He sighed. So, what now? Rilla swallowed the last bite of fruit and looked at him with pure excitement. Now, we go on an adventure, of course. James rubbed his temples. That's not how this works. She tilted her head. Why not? James groaned. Because I don't even know you, and I didn't plan for this. Rilla giggled. But life is never planned, right? Things just happen. And I think we were meant to meet. James exhaled slowly. He had to admit there was something infectious about her enthusiasm. Fine, he muttered. For now, you can stick with me. But we need to get off this planet first. Rilla clapped her hands. Yes, this will be amazing. James sighed again. He had a feeling he was in for a very long journey. James walked quickly through the crowded market streets, his mind racing. He had just spent 10,000 credits on an alien woman who now refused to leave his side. This was not how his day was supposed to go. Rilla, on the other hand, seemed overjoyed. She walked beside him, her silver-blue skin glowing under the neon lights of the marketplace. Every few seconds, she gasped in amazement at something new. Oh, look at that! She pointed at a hovering robotic merchant, its mechanical arms waving as it displayed a variety of strange artifacts. James sighed. Rilla, focus. We need to get to my ship. She turned to him, her large, bright eyes full of excitement. Yes, we go on a grand adventure now. James groaned. We're not going on an adventure. I'm just getting us out of here before someone decides they want you back. Rilla's smile faded slightly. Oh, right. James didn't want to scare her, but he knew how these alien markets worked. Someone might not be happy about him taking her, even if he had bought her legally. He needed to leave before trouble found them. They turned into a quieter alley leading to the spaceport. The hum of engines and the flashing lights of ships preparing for takeoff filled the air. James glanced over his shoulder. No one seemed to be following them. Maybe he was just being paranoid. As they neared his ship, an old but sturdy freighter named the Horizon, Rilla gasped. Is this yours? Yeah, James said, pressing a button on his wrist device. The ship's entrance ramp lowered with a soft hiss. Rilla hesitated at the bottom of the ramp. Her fingers curled slightly, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. James frowned. What's wrong? She glanced at him. I've never been on a ship before. James softened. It's just like stepping into a big metal room. Come on. She took a deep breath, then nodded and stepped onto the ramp. The moment she crossed into the ship, she gasped again. It's amazing. James chuckled. It's not much, but it gets me where I need to go. The inside of the Horizon was simple. Metal walls, blinking control panels, and a few scattered crates. Rilla spun in a slow circle, taking everything in. This is wonderful, she said. James shook his head. You sure get excited easily. She grinned. Because everything is new. I've never left my home before. And now, I am on a spaceship with a human. This is the greatest day of my life." James sighed and walked toward the cockpit. "Well, let's hope we don't get into trouble before we leave." He sat in the pilot's seat and began powering up the ship. The engines hummed to life, and the dashboard lights flickered on. Suddenly, an alert flashed on the screen. "Warning. Unauthorized purchase under investigation." James stiffened. "Oh, great." Rilla leaned over his shoulder. "What does that mean?" "It means someone isn't happy that I bought you." He checked the scanners. A group of security drones was approaching the spaceport. "We need to leave. Now." Rilla grabbed the back of his chair. "Can I help?" James didn't have time to argue. "Strap in and hold on." He pressed a series of buttons, and the ship's thrusters roared. Outside, the security drones activated their sirens. "Unauthorized vessel, power down your engines and prepare for inspection." James gritted his teeth. Not happening. He pulled the controls, and the horizon lifted off. The security drones fired warning shots, but James was already accelerating. The ship shot through the sky, breaking through the planet's atmosphere. Rilla let out a cheer. That was amazing. James exhaled. "Yeah, well, let's hope no one follows us." As they entered deep space, he glanced at Rilla. She was grinning, her eyes filled with excitement. James shook his head. "I think I just got myself into something big." Rilla laughed. "Yes. And it's only the beginning." James leaned back in his pilot's chair, exhaling as the horizon entered deep space. The blue glow of Volker 7 faded behind them, replaced by the endless stars stretching out in every direction. He had done it, escaped before the security drones could stop him. But now he had a new problem. Rilla. She was sitting in the co-pilot's seat, swinging her legs excitedly, her silver-blue skin glowing under the soft lights of the cockpit. She turned to him with a bright smile. "So, where are we going?" James sighed. "I don't know. I was supposed to finish a trade deal before I spent all my credits on you." Rilla giggled. "You don't sound very happy about that." "I'm not." He rubbed his face. "Look, I was just trying to help you. I didn't expect you to. Well, want to stay with me?" She tilted her head. "Why wouldn't I?" James groaned. "Because you're free now. You can go wherever you want." Rilla nodded. "Yes, and I choose to go with you." James threw up his hands. "Why?" Rilla grinned. "Because you are the first person who has ever been kind to me." James stared at her. She said it so casually, like it was a simple fact. His chest tightened a little. "You've never met anyone kind before." She shook her head. "The people on my homeworld, they are not like you." James frowned. He wanted to ask more, but he could see a hint of sadness in her eyes. Instead, he sighed and turned back to the controls. "Fine. For now, you can stay. But no trouble, all right?" Rilla clapped her hands. "Yes. No trouble." James narrowed his eyes. That was too easy. She just smiled. Shaking his head, James checked the ship's status. "All right. First thing, I need to refuel. We'll stop at a space station nearby." Rilla gasped. "A space station? I've never been to one." James sighed. "Of course you haven't." A few hours later, the horizon approached a massive station floating in the darkness. Dozens of ships of different shapes and sizes were docked along its rings. Bright lights blinked across its metal surface, guiding travelers inside. James contacted the docking control, paid the landing fee, using most of his remaining credits, and carefully guided the ship into a hangar. As the engines powered down, he turned to Rilla. "Listen," he said, "we're just here to refuel. No distractions, no getting lost, no talking to strange aliens." Rilla nodded eagerly. "Understood." James sighed. He had a bad feeling about this. The ship's ramp lowered, and the two stepped onto the station's busy floor. The air was filled with the hum of alien voices, the smell of various foods, and the distant sound of music. Rilla's eyes widened in amazement. "This is incredible." "Stay close," James reminded her. He walked toward the refueling station, but after a few steps, he realized something. Rilla wasn't beside him. His stomach dropped. He turned around. And of course, she was already halfway across the hangar, staring in wonder at a floating holographic display. James groaned and rushed over. "Rilla." She turned to him, eyes sparkling. "James, look at this. It's a floating map, and it moves when I touch it." James grabbed her wrist gently. "I told you to stay close." Rilla pouted. "But there are so many amazing things here." James sighed. "I know, but this station isn't exactly safe. There are people here, Poe." "Hey, you." James stiffened. That wasn't good. He turned to see a group of rough-looking aliens approaching. Their armor was scratched, their eyes sharp. Mercenaries. James pulled Rilla behind him. "Stay quiet," he whispered. The lead alien, a tall reptilian creature, sneered. "We heard about a human buying something valuable at the market on Focus 7. His yellow eyes flicked to Rilla. "And now we see you here." James forced a smile. "You must be mistaken." The alien grinned, showing sharp teeth. "I don't think so." Rilla gripped James's arm tightly. James's mind raced. He had no weapons, no backup, and no way to run without causing a scene. This was bad, and he had a feeling things were about to get worse. James's heart pounded as the reptilian alien and his group moved closer. The space station was crowded, but no one cared about a human getting cornered by mercenaries. Trouble like this happened all the time in places like this. Rilla clung to his arm, her silver-blue skin slightly glowing in the dim station lights. He could feel her trembling. The reptilian alien sneered. "We don't like people who steal from the market." James forced himself to stay calm. "I didn't steal anything. I bought her. Legally." The alien chuckled, his yellow eyes glinting. "Legal or not, someone wants her back, and they're willing to pay a lot for it." James's grip tightened. "I'm not selling her." The mercenary's grin widened. "That's too bad, because we weren't asking." The other mercenaries took a step forward, hands on their weapons. James cursed under his breath. He had no weapons, no backup, and no way to fight off a group of trained killers. "Think, James. Think." He glanced around. The station was full of people. That meant cameras. Security. If he could cause a scene, maybe. Rilla suddenly grabbed his hand. "James, close your eyes." "What?" he whispered. "Just do it." Something in her voice made him obey. He shut his eyes just as a blinding flash filled the air. Shouts and curses erupted around them. James opened his eyes to see the mercenaries stumbling, their hands covering their faces. The crowd around them backed away, confused and alarmed. Rilla tugged his hand. "Run." James didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed her wrist and sprinted through the crowd. Behind them, the mercenaries growled and shouted, but they were still disoriented. "What did you do?" James asked as they ran. Rilla grinned. "Villari can release a burst of light from our skin. It blinds enemies for a few seconds." James shook his head. "You could have mentioned that earlier." "No time for details," she said cheerfully. James weaved through the station's hallways, dodging vendors, travelers, and workers. The hangar where the Horizon was docked wasn't far, if they could just. A loud alarm blared across the station. "ATNTYON. Disturbance in CCC 4. Security deployed." James cursed. Now security was after them too. "This just keeps getting better," he muttered. Rilla giggled. "This is exciting." James groaned. "You and I have very different ideas of exciting." They rounded a corner, and the Horizon's docking bay came into view. But just as James felt hope, two security officers stepped in front of them. weapons drawn. Halt. Hands where we can see them. James skidded to a stop. Rilla nearly bumped into him. The officers wore black uniforms, their faces hidden by helmets. Their weapons weren't lethal, but a stun blast would be enough to knock them out. James slowly raised his hands. Look, this is a misunderstanding. A deep roar echoed behind them. James turned just in time to see the mercenaries pushing through the crowd. Their leader snarled, his reptilian face twisted in anger. There they are. Grab them. The security officers hesitated, suddenly realizing that James and Rilla weren't the only problem. James made his move. He lunged forward, grabbing one officer's wrist and shoving his weapon away. Before the second officer could react, Rilla stepped forward, her skin flashing again. Another bright burst of light filled the hall. The officers flinched, momentarily blinded. James didn't wait. He pulled Rilla and sprinted toward the horizon. The ship's entrance ramp was already down. James hit his wrist device, activating the emergency lockdown. As soon as they were inside, the ramp closed, and the ship's defenses powered up. James collapsed into the pilot's seat, breathing heavily. That was way too close. Rilla laughed as she jumped into the co-pilot's seat. That was fun. James groaned. You have a strange idea of fun. Outside, alarms blared. Security and mercenaries surrounded the ship, but it was too late. James fired the thrusters. The horizon lifted off, engines roaring. The station's defense systems tried to lock onto them, but James twisted the controls, weaving through the docking rings and blasting into open space. As soon as they were clear, he let out a long breath and turned to Rilla. Okay, he said, no more distractions. We are going somewhere safe. Rilla grinned. Where? James stared at the stars ahead. He didn't know yet, but one thing was certain. He wasn't letting anyone take Rilla away. And their journey was far from over. James leaned back in his pilot's seat, trying to catch his breath. The horizon had escaped the space station, but alarms were still flashing on the dashboard. The ship's scanners showed multiple red blips, small fighters launching from the station. Rilla, still grinning from their escape, leaned closer to the screen. Are they following us? James sighed. Yeah. And they're not happy. Rilla tilted her head. Why are they so determined to catch us? You bought me legally, right? James tightened his grip on the controls. Yeah, but someone must have placed a bounty on you. Either the market owners want their property back, or someone else thinks you're valuable. Rilla frowned. I don't like that. Me neither, James muttered. The enemy ships closed in fast. The comm system crackled to life. Unidentified freighter, surrender and power down your engines. You are carrying stolen goods. James scoffed. You're not stolen goods, Rilla. She nodded. I know, but they don't care. James quickly scanned the star map. They were in open space, with no nearby planets to hide on. His only option was to outrun them. Hold on, he said, gripping the controls. The enemy ships opened fire. Bright energy bolts streaked past the horizon, shaking the ship as one blast grazed the shields. Shields at 60%. Rilla read from the control panel. James cursed. This ship wasn't built for dogfights. He pushed the throttle forward, and the horizon shot ahead, weaving through space. The enemy fighters followed, their weapons glowing as they prepared another attack. Rilla suddenly gasped. There, that nebula. James looked where she was pointing. A swirling purple nebula stretched across the horizon, its gases thick and unpredictable. Good idea, he said. They can't track us in there. The ship trembled under another blast. The shields dropped to 50%. No time to hesitate. James steered straight into the nebula. The moment they entered, everything changed. The nebula's thick clouds swirled around them, blocking all views of open space. The sensors went wild, unable to get a proper reading. Lightning crackled in the distance, illuminating the gas clouds in eerie flashes. The enemy fighters hesitated at the edge. They fired a few more shots, but their targeting systems couldn't lock onto the horizon. Then one of the enemy ships made a mistake. It followed them in. James gritted his teeth. They're not giving up. Rilla looked at him. What do we do? James smirked. We make them regret it. He cut the engines, letting the horizon drift silently inside the nebula. The enemy fighter zoomed past them, unable to see properly. James spun the ship around and fired the rear thrusters. The sudden burst sent them right behind the enemy. Before the pilot could react, James hit a button, releasing a decoy flare. The enemy fighter's sensors locked onto it, thinking it was the horizon. The flare exploded, sending out a massive energy wave. The enemy fighter's systems overloaded, and the ship spiraled out of control. James didn't wait to see what happened next. He powered the engines and flew deeper into the nebula, vanishing from their pursuers. After several tense minutes, the scanners showed no signs of pursuit. James finally relaxed, exhaling loudly. Rilla clapped her hands. That was amazing. James laughed weakly. I don't want to do that again. He set a course out of the nebula, making sure they were far from any enemy ships before leaving. When they emerged, open space stretched in front of them, quiet, peaceful, and safe. For now. James rubbed his forehead. All right, we need a real plan. We can't keep running forever. Rilla nodded. So what do we do? James thought for a moment. Then, an idea came to him. I know someone who might help. An old friend. If anyone can figure out why people are after you, it's him. Rilla's eyes sparkled with curiosity. Where is he? James punched in the coordinates. On a hidden outpost, far away from all this trouble. As the horizon jumped into hyperspace, James glanced at Rilla. Something about her was special, and whoever wanted her back knew it. But until he found out the truth, one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let anyone take her away. James guided the horizon through hyperspace, watching the blue-tinted light streak past the cockpit window. The ship hummed softly, the engines stabilizing after their rough escape. Rilla sat beside him, swinging her legs excitedly. So, this friend of yours, can we trust him? James smirked. Mostly. Rilla raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound very safe. James sighed. Look, I don't have many friends out here, but if anyone can figure out why people are after you, it's him. He knows things. Rilla tilted her head. Is he human? James shook his head. No, he's Xelvarian. His name is Torin. Rilla gasped. I've heard of Xelvarians. They're information brokers, right? James nodded. Exactly. And Torin is one of the best. If there's a secret out there, he probably knows it. Rilla grinned. Then let's go meet him. James chuckled. You're way too excited about this. A few hours later, the horizon dropped out of hyperspace near a desolate asteroid field. The stars were dim, the space around them eerily quiet. James adjusted the controls. Torin's outpost should be hidden somewhere in there. Rilla stared at the floating rocks. How do we find it? James smirked. We don't. He finds us. Just as he said that, a voice crackled over the comm system. Well, well, if it isn't James. You just can't stay out of trouble, can you? James grinned. Hello, Torin. Mind letting us in? A moment later, one of the asteroids shimmered, then disappeared, revealing a hidden metal structure built into the rock. A docking bay door slowly opened. James guided the horizon inside. The docking bay was dimly lit, with walls covered in old screens and tangled wires. As the ship powered down, a tall, cloaked figure approached. Torin's reptilian face was partially hidden under his hood, but his glowing yellow eyes studied James carefully. You always bring interesting problems, my friend. James stepped down from the ship. Torin, meet Rilla. Torin turned his gaze to Rilla. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his eyes narrowed. Ah, now I see why you're in trouble. Rilla shifted nervously. What do you mean? Torrin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for them to follow. They walked through the outpost's dark halls until they reached a room filled with floating holographic screens. Torrin tapped a control panel, and information began scrolling across the displays. He looked at James. You really don't know who she is, do you? James crossed his arms. I know she's a Velari, and that someone put a bounty on her. Torrin chuckled. She's not just a Velari. She's the Velari. James frowned. What does that mean? Torrin turned to Rilla. Tell me, girl. Do you know anything about your past? Rilla hesitated. I was taken from my home when I was young. I don't remember much. Torrin nodded. That's because they wanted you to forget. James stepped forward. Explain. Torrin pulled up an image, a symbol, ancient-looking, glowing with golden light. This is the crest of the Velari royal bloodline, he said. And this. He tapped another screen, zooming in on Rilla's wrist. A faint, almost invisible marking glowed on her skin. The same symbol. James's eyes widened. She's. Torrin nodded. Velari royalty. The last of her line. Rilla gasped. That can't be true. Torrin turned to her. Your people were overthrown long ago. The ones who took power erased all records of your existence. They sold you off, hid you in the market, hoping you'd disappear forever. James clenched his fists. And now someone's realized she's still alive. Torrin's expression darkened. And they won't stop until she's dead. Rilla took a step back, her hands trembling. I don't understand. Why would they do this? Torrin sighed. Because if you return, you could challenge their rule. You are the rightful heir. James put a hand on her shoulder. Rilla, what do you want to do? She took a shaky breath. I don't know. Torrin folded his arms. Well, you better decide soon. Because now that you know the truth, things are about to get worse. James nodded. Then we fight. Torrin smirked. Now that's the James I remember. As alarms flashed across the screens, warning of incoming ships, James knew one thing for certain. The real battle was just beginning. Alarms blared throughout the outpost, casting red light over the control room. James turned to Torrin, his pulse racing. Who is it? He asked. Torrin's yellow eyes flickered as he scanned the incoming ships on the display. Bad news. A bounty hunter fleet just entered the sector. Rilla clenched her fists. They found us. James swore under his breath. How many? Torrin sighed. Too many. Looks like they're not taking chances this time. 3 attack cruisers and a dozen fighters. James rubbed his forehead. Great. So, we're outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped inside an asteroid. Rilla looked at him. What do we do? James took a deep breath. Running wasn't an option anymore. They had to fight. He turned to Torrin. Do you have any defenses? Torrin smirked. Of course. I may be a simple information broker, but I don't like uninvited guests. He tapped a control panel, and suddenly, parts of the asteroid outside shifted. Hidden turrets emerged, their barrels glowing as they powered up. Rilla's eyes widened. Whoa. James grinned. I like your style. Torrin chuckled. Let's see if it's enough. Outside, the bounty hunter fleet spread out, their weapons charging. The lead ship, a dark, heavily armed cruiser, sent a broadcast to the outpost. This is Captain Droken of the Black Fang. Surrender the girl, and we'll make your deaths quick. James pressed the comms button. Yeah, I've got a counteroffer. How about you turn around and go home? Captain Droken laughed. Wrong choice. The enemy ships opened fire. The asteroid shook as laser blasts struck its surface. The outpost's turrets fired back, hitting one of the smaller fighters. It exploded in a bright flash. James ran toward the horizon. Rilla, come on. We need to get in the air. Rilla followed, her expression determined. I want to help. Torrin stayed behind, managing the defense systems. I'll cover you. Go. James and Rilla boarded the Horizon as explosions rattled the docking bay. James jumped into the pilot's seat, flipping switches. The ship hummed to life. Rilla strapped herself into the co-pilot seat. Let's do this. James smirked. Now you're talking. He pushed the throttle. The Horizon lifted off, flying out of the asteroid's hidden hangar just as another blast hit the outpost. The moment they were in open space, enemy fighters swarmed toward them. Hang on, James shouted. He rolled the ship sideways, dodging incoming fire. The asteroid's turrets continued shooting, taking out another fighter. But there were still too many. A warning light flashed. Rilla read the screen. They're locking onto us. James growled. Not today. He pulled the ship into a steep dive, weaving through the asteroid field. The bounty hunter ships followed, struggling to match the Horizon's speed. James narrowed his eyes. Rilla, can you use the rear turret? She hesitated. I've never used one before. James grinned. Then this is a great time to learn. Rilla nodded and unbuckled her seatbelt, running to the turret controls. She gripped the handles, aiming at the incoming fighters. One of them fired a missile. Rilla gasped. Incoming missile. James spun the ship sharply, dodging at the last second. The missile exploded behind them, shaking the ship. Rilla took a deep breath and focused. She squeezed the trigger, and the turret fired a stream of laser blasts. One of the enemy fighters took a hit, its engine sparking. It spiraled out of control and crashed into an asteroid. Yes, Rilla cheered. James laughed. Nice shot. But there was no time to celebrate. The lead cruiser was still closing in. Torrin's voice crackled over the radio. I have an idea. James glanced at the screen. I hope it's a good one. Torrin's voice was calm. Trust me. Just get the big ship to chase you. James smirked. Oh, I can do that. James steered the Horizon straight toward the lead cruiser, dodging fire from its cannons. The massive ship turned, trying to lock onto them. Torrin's outpost, now heavily damaged, powered up one last defense system, an energy overload trap. James flew past the cruiser, barely avoiding its weapons. At the same moment, Torrin activated the trap. A massive pulse of energy erupted from the asteroid, short-circuiting the cruiser's shields and engines. The giant ship went dark, floating helplessly in space. James whooped. That was brilliant. The remaining enemy fighters panicked, retreating into hyperspace. Rilla slumped back in her seat, exhausted but grinning. We did it. James let out a long breath. Yeah, but it's not over. Torrin's voice came back. You need to leave. Now. More will come. James nodded. He turned to Rilla. Where do you want to go? Rilla thought for a moment. Then she lifted her chin. I want to take back my home. James smiled. Then let's make it happen. As the Horizon jumped into hyperspace, they knew the final battle was coming. And they were ready. The stars stretched into lines as the Horizon shot through hyperspace. James sat in the pilot's seat, his fingers tapping against the controls. He glanced at Rilla, who sat beside him, staring out the window. Her expression was calm, but he could see the fire in her eyes. This is it, James said. Are you sure about this? Rilla turned to him and nodded. I have to do this. My people need me. James smirked. Then let's give them a reason to fight. Their destination. Velar Prime, the homeworld of the Velari people. A planet now controlled by those who had stolen Rilla's birthright. If they wanted to free it, they would have to fight for it. Torrin had provided them with the final piece of information before they left. The identity of the one who placed the bounty on Rilla. A warlord named Selvuk. As the Horizon exited hyperspace near Velar Prime, the sight before them made James' stomach twist. A fleet of warships hovered in orbit, guarding the planet like a cage. Rilla sucked in a breath. There's more than I expected. James sighed. Yeah, a frontal attack is suicide. The radio crackled. It was Torin. I figured you'd need some backup. Suddenly, hyperspace portals opened all around them. Dozens of ships appeared. Mercenaries, rebels, and smugglers. A ragtag fleet, but a fleet nonetheless. James grinned. Torin, you beautiful lizard. Torin chuckled. Don't get sentimental. You still have a war to win. The enemy fleet took notice. Their ships turned, weapons charging. The battle had begun. Explosions lit up the dark space as ships clashed in a chaotic dance of fire and steel. James weaved through enemy fire, dodging lasers and missiles. Rilla manned the turret, taking down fighters with deadly precision. She was a natural now. This is insane, she shouted over the comms. James laughed. Welcome to war. They dodged past a massive battleship, barely escaping its heavy cannons. James spotted a clear path toward the planet. There's our opening, he yelled. Rilla's eyes hardened. Let's go. James pushed the engines to their limit, diving toward the planet's surface. Velar Prime was a beautiful world, covered in golden cities and lush forests. But its beauty was tainted by the sight of enemy patrols, towering fortresses, and the massive palace that once belonged to Rilla's family. Now it was Selvok's throne. James landed the horizon outside a hidden rebel base. Velari resistance fighters greeted them, their eyes wide as they saw Rilla step out. One of them, a gray-haired Velari warrior, stared at her in shock. It's true. You're alive. Rilla nodded. And I'm here to take back our world. The warriors kneeled. We are yours to command, my queen. James whistled. That's a nice change. Rilla turned to him. Are you with me? James smirked. Always. The battle for Velar Prime began. The Velari rebels stormed the streets, fighting against the warlord's forces. Explosions rocked the city as fighters clashed in the skies. James and Rilla led the charge toward the palace. Enemy soldiers blocked their path, but the rebels fought with newfound hope. Rilla fought like a true warrior, taking down enemies with skill and determination. James covered her, blasting away threats with his pistol. They pushed forward, breaking through the palace gates. Inside, Selvok waited. The warlord was massive, covered in dark armor. His red eyes glowed with fury as he stepped forward. So, the lost princess returns, he growled. You should have stayed hidden. Rilla stepped forward, her voice steady. This is my home, and you don't belong here. Selvok laughed. You are nothing but a child. You cannot win. James aimed his gun. She's not alone. The battle was fierce. Selvok was strong, but Rilla was faster. She dodged his heavy strikes, striking back with precision. James fired his blaster, distracting the warlord just long enough for Rilla to land a decisive blow. Her blade slashed across Selvok's chest. He staggered, falling to one knee. Rilla stood over him. This is for my people. With one final strike, it was over. The palace fell silent. Outside, the rebel forces cheered as word spread. Selvok was defeated. Velar Prime was free. Rilla stood at the balcony, looking down at her people. They chanted her name, their voices filled with hope. James leaned against the wall, watching her. So, what now, Your Majesty? Rilla turned to him, smiling. I rebuild. I lead. She paused. And you? James shrugged. I don't know. I was never the stay-in-one-place kind of guy. Rilla's smile faded slightly. Will I see you again? James grinned. Try and stop me. She laughed. As the sun rose over Velar Prime, a new era began. And James knew this was just the beginning of another adventure.